Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday service for April 10th, 2022. We will begin with the sutra chanting of Jusei-ge. 가곤 조세간 희심의조도 시간 흠한석 세부조쇼가 가우무료고 의다이세슈 의사이쇼빙그 세부조쇼가 가시조분도 묘쇼조집보 극교미쇼몬 세부조쇼가 그리오그진쇼넨조의 시방교 시금의조도 이쇼텐닌시 진리기엔라이고 흐쇼무사이도 쇼조상금요 고사이시야구난 가이지에겐 메시고모안 헤이소그쇼아구도 츠단센시몬 고소조만소 기요로 입보 니지간지지기 탱컴브겐 이시가이 호소 고세그도쿠오 조다이시지 세포지시그 그요 이사이브 그소그시도쿠온 간내신조만 도쿠이상가요 야붓무게지 츠단미흐쇼 강가구에릭 도시사이쇼선 시간약고가 다이세노간도 거그쇼텐닌 도진묘계 나만다부 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 간니시그도쿠 묘도세이사이 덜헌보다이신 오조한 나만다스 나만다스 Could you please join me in Gasho? Concerning compassion, there is a difference between the path of sages and the Pure Land path. Compassion in the path of sages is to pity, commiserate with, and care for beings. It is extremely difficult, however, to accomplish the saving of others, just as one wishes. Compassion in the Pure Land path should be understood as first attaining Buddhahood quickly, through saying the Nembutsu, and with the mind of great love and compassion, freely benefiting sentient beings as one wishes. However much love and pity we may feel in our present lives, it is hard to save others as we wish. Hence, such compassion remains unfulfilled. Only the saying of the Nembutsu then is the mind of great compassion that is thoroughgoing. Thus were his words. From Tanisho, A Record and Lament of Differences, Chapter 4. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning, everyone. Today, Sunday, April 10th, I've now completed my Hanamatsuri service for Salt Lake, Ogden, and Honeyville. And it's somewhat feels like we're getting back to normal, but Hanamatsuri is such a big event as far as the temple cultures. It has a huge swath, for me. I know that, as I spoke about during the Hanamatsuri service, the Hanamatsuri is rather a secondary service in traditional Jodo Shinshu Honganji Ha tradition. But for the temples I grew up in, and I would say for the majority of Buddhist Churches of America temples, Hanamatsuri is a big one. Hanamatsuri is a big holiday. It involves the young, the old, has so many memories. Right? And so it still isn't what I thought it used to be, because we didn't have a children's program, we didn't have the big luncheon, we didn't see the kids dressed like when my girls were little, because many times Hanamatsuri would even fall on Easter. Right? And I talked about this, how when I was a kid, my parents didn't differentiate between a lot of things, so they would buy us Easter clothes. I have a picture somewhere of myself. That's where I think I got my love of hats. I was able to get a little white straw hat, kind of a fedora, and a suit, and I thought I was so cool, with those. So on Hanamatsuri, I would have my girls pick out Hanamatsuri clothes. I says, I'll buy you a gift for Hanamatsuri, just so they get this same excitement of Hanamatsuri that I did. And I had all these memories of the various performances that I did during that time. But because of our slowly getting back after pandemic, we didn't have those things, which I think are good. But we will get back to those activities that really bring the Sangha together. Like this year, we're going to try to hold Obon, which I would have to put as number one. Even though Honko is said to be our most important religious services, Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, Obon is the one that I think really resonates within those of us born into BCA temples or coming to BCA temples. Is a very fantastic service. It brings us not just the service, but the entire time of Obon, the practices going into Obon, the getting together with friends. It takes years to develop these traditions, but we are beginning to have our own culture in regards to this. And the reason I'm thinking about this culture so much, since I finished Hanamatsuri, is kind of one of those, so for a while I could get back to my TV watching like I did for the past 2 years during the pandemic. And so I watched one Korean drama called The Cursed. And it was about possession. Right? And in these Korean dramas, they show all these various rituals that the Korean shamans do. And in the show always says these are based on fictitious events, not real events or whatever. But they are based on shamanistic practices that do happen in Korea. And when I asked Carmela about it, and I said, look at this. Kind of looks like a Native American practice and combined with different Asian things. And they're shaking leaves and things like that. And Carmela first goes, oh, that's just silliness. But then today is what we call, well, not we, but Catholics and Orthodox Christians call Palm Sunday. If you grew up in Buddhist, you probably don't know what Palm Sunday is. But Palm Sunday is the Sunday before, the week before Easter, right? And the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it's supposedly when Jesus entered into the city of Jerusalem and he was greeted by his followers waving palms, which was like a symbol of honor, and they would cast palms before him, and he rode in, the story says he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, you know, and a donkey was symbolic because a horse was an animal of war used for warfare. Donkeys aren't used for wars, so a man of peace rode in on a donkey. And part of Palm Sunday, I said, what did you do when you were growing up? It's Catholic, and she said that they would take palms to the church, because in the Philippines they have palms. I wonder, some churches, from what I heard now, that don't have palm trees, they're actually being willow branches or birch branches, native trees to that area. And they just like in the Philippines, they would take palms to the Catholic Church and have them blessed by the fathers. These people take these other types of native trees. So you can see how this culture is changing, right? But she says then they would get the palms, and some places would actually weave them into crosses and put them on their doors and places to help keep out evil. Just like that Korean ceremony that I was watching on TV, where those shamans were dancing around, shaking leaves, to get rid of evil. All right? So the bottom line is the same, but the way they do it may be a little bit different. But that's culture. Culture is something we do. And it's important to understand that culture because it's created by those members who come together. So for us, as a temple, it's coming together. So today I read chapter 4 from Tanyin Sho, and it's where Shinran differentiates between Theravadist Buddhist practices and Jodo Shinshi Pure Land practices about compassion. In one word, you could say social justice. And Jodo Shinshi doesn't have a key social justice component like Christianity does, right? And Shinran explains to it, and he talks about Pure Land practice is first to gain Buddhahood for yourself, right? And every time I go on a plane, I think of this chapter 4 when the flight attendant tells you, if you have a child with you, first put the mask on yourself before you put it on your child, right? Because what good is it to put the mask on the child if you die? The same thing. If you're not help yourself in any way, how are you going to help your child? All right? So Shinran's differentiating that. But I think in America, there's a need to have a certain social justice component within the culture of our temple. Right? And each temple, as I've said, is very different. BCA, you know, we see Japan, we see America, and we think of these as big monolithic cultures. But in actuality, there are a bunch of small cultures within it. When I went to Europe, I first thought, well, isn't that strange that there's all these countries in this little tiny area, Europe. Right? It's not that big, Europe, but there's all these European countries. In the United States, that's one of the reasons why I did that trip through the 48 states. I wanted to see how big America was. And it's huge. And it's almost like we have 48 countries within the United States. And within those countries, each have its own culture. You know, in the Webster's Dictionary, I looked up culture, and it says, first, culture is the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. Also the characteristics, features of everyday existence. B, the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or organization, a corporate culture focused on the bottom line. C, the set of values, conventions, or social practices associated with a particular field, activity, or societal characteristics, studying the effect of computers on print, culture, etc. D, the integrated pattern of human knowledge, belief, and behavior that depends upon the capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. So if you listen to these definitions, I think it very much defines temples. Right? It is something that we're trying to pass our knowledge of what it is to be a human being, how to navigate it to succeeding generations. Right? We have a set of values that we're trying to share. Right? All these things that define culture is what we try to do within our Sangha. And you could really put all this down to 5 characteristics of the culture. And because I wrote these down before, I said, culture is learned. It's not biological. It's not inherited. Right? Culture is shared, meaning we do culture. Right? It's not something that does us. We do the culture. Right? Culture is based on a variety of symbols, such as, in a very religious way, you wouldn't put it as such, but symbols such as Namo Amida Butsu, Gassho, Itadakimasu, right? Even Sumimasen, excuse me. These are all symbols of our culture. Culture is integrated. To understand culture, you must understand all its parts and how it affects each other. Thus, culture is dynamic. It's changing, and we grow with it. But a book that I was really into a few years ago, called The Culture Code by Dan Coyle, he says that there's certain characteristics of successful cultures. And I think in our temples, these are very valuable traits that I hope that we put a high priority on in our temples. And now that we are coming back together after these 2 years of isolation, I hope we could concentrate on making sure these are part of our temple cultures. I will try my best to make this a part, right? And that is first to create safety, so that whoever comes to our Sangha feels safe, whoever they may be. That means that it's not take me just as I am. Be aware of what the person next to you is thinking or feeling. Be concerned for their well-being, maybe more than your own in some cases. Right? The second one is the ability to share the vulnerability that we each have as individuals and as a group. It's this mutual risk that we have through our cooperation. And then, of course, it's the purpose. And the purpose of our Sangha is our Sangha, the Salt Lake Buddhist Temple, Ogden Buddhist Temple, Honeyville Buddhist Temple, Idaho, Oregon Buddhist Temple that I'm involved with, the purpose is the Jodo Shinshu teaching. Right? So these 3 points are part of this dynamic energy that happens within a Sangha. And as we're getting back into our usual patterns of coming together in person, I'm kind of split on what I like. I sure miss getting together with people, right? Feeling the feedback when I talk, after we have our discussions in the adult study class, talking about things I've been thinking about. I really miss that. But getting up and not having to put on a suit, tie so much, just walking into my living room area to do my service, that's very nice also. Right? But I think I prefer us getting together. And I just hope that our temples, our sanghas, are aware of what we have to do as a sangha, of supporting one another. There's always, especially when there has been a void like this, that certain individuals can try to overpower the rest. Within my years of being a minister, the one poisonous aspect of a temple is that pride or arrogance takes over certain individuals. They think that they're more important than others, that they get to decide what happens. Let's not do that. Let's be extremely cautious in doing that. We have people that really bend over backwards to make our sanghas work. It amazes me all the time how hard they work. Right? But sometimes those same people begin to think that they're more important than others. And this doesn't work. When I think of the Buddhist churches of America, we've been over 100 years here. Right? This is a passage that Bishop Koyu Uchida, the bishop of the North American Buddhist Mission from 1930, wrote concerning Buddhism in America. He said, Nishihonganji was the first Japanese Buddhist denomination to start an American mission, which in itself exemplifies the history of an eastward transmission of the Buddhist teachings. This means that American Buddhists have considerable responsibility as pioneers for spreading the teachings around the world. And I think the first Kaikyoshi, for those of you who might not know them, are trained and certified by Jodo Shinshu Honganji Ha to help transmit or share the teaching around the world. But from the time of Bishop Uchida, the Buddhist mission of North America changed to the Buddhist Churches of America. And this happened about 10 years after Bishop Uchida, during the 40s. Because during World War II, all the kaikyoshi were basically rounded up, and the leaders of the temples, who were mostly Issei, Japanese, were put into special interrogation camps, which left the Niseis, who were mostly teenagers, maybe teenagers, late teens, early 20s, who spoke English, to take over the organization. And they actually wrote the entire thing and came up with the Buddhist Churches of America. They did this at Topaz Concentration Center in Delta, Utah. Right? So we can see how things have changed. And once again, I think this pandemic will be such that just as the camps are remembered for generations, we're still talking about it and feeling the effects after 70 years. This pandemic will also be one of those things that change the entire identity of things. So as we come out of this isolation, I hope that our sanghas are aware of how our culture at the Salt Lake, Ogden, Honeyville, IOBT temples are affected by individuals, right? To create a culture that exemplifies a safe space, a place that's opening up to have shared vulnerabilities. But the bottom line purpose is Jodo Shinshu teachings. The culture, the outward aspects are going to change. It's a huge difference from Japanese Buddhist temples to many big American Buddhist temples. But it's a natural occurrence. It's neither good nor bad, it just is. And the temples between California, Utah, moving east are just as different. And those of us who live in the area that I serve, we're different again, right? We have a culture developed by pioneers. You know, the Mormon church is huge. We're aware of all these various things, and they are what create our temple culture. So as we come back together, I hope that you are each aware of how you have a responsibility, as Bishop Ushida says. We have a great responsibility to share what it is to be a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist. You know, the most culturally diverse, I would say, Buddhist organization in the world is called Sokogakkai International, SGI, or Nichiren Shoshu. I was reading this book by their president, some writings, but I took away this quote that I thought, you know, we're different sects of Buddhism, but boy, he's a smart guy in saying this. So I want to close today's talk with this quote by Daisaku Ikeda, the founder of Sokogakkai International, because I think this applies to us as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists in Utah, just the same. So please join me in Gassho. None of us can exist in isolation. Our lives and existence are supported by others in seen and unseen ways, be it by parents, mentors, or society at large. To be aware of these connections, to feel appreciation for them, and to strive to give something back to society in a spirit of gratitude is the proper way for human beings to live. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you everyone for joining us for this morning service. Hopefully I will see some of you next week at our live services at the Salt Lake and Ogden Buddhist Temple. Salt Lake is at 1:30, Ogden is at 10. And there is the meditation service led by Reverend Carmela at 12:30. Thank you, we'll see you soon.